Anne's story, A Light in the Quiet. The first thing that catches you is the quiet. Not the pleasant kind, but the kind that makes a person wonder if the house has forgotten how to breathe. That's what Anne heard on Tuesday evening, the quiet pressing in around her, the kind that turns the tick of a clock into a drum. If loneliness could talk, it would sound exactly like this room at dusk. And if loneliness could hurt the body, as surely as a bad habit or a pack of cigarettes, then Anne had been carrying it in her chest for months without knowing its name. She noticed the ache most when the sun slid low and the light reached across her living room floor like long fingers. There was his chair by the window, the one with the soft dip where his shoulder once leaned. There were the books he'd underlined in pencil. There was the mug he favored for evening tea, still on the shelf because she could not put it anywhere else. Is this how the rest of my life will feel? She wondered, not loudly, not even sadly, just honestly, the way a person wonders about weather. Anne is 72. She has 2 sons who love her, one in Toronto, one in Seattle, each managing their small galaxies of work and homework and leaky faucets. They call, they visit when they can, and they offer the same apology all grown children offer their parents. Soon, Mom. It isn't that they've forgotten her. It's that the world is fast, and they are running inside it. Anne understands. She remembers speed. But the house is slow now, and that is the difference. Her days have become tidy but thin. In the morning, she sets a careful cup on the table, pours coffee, and reads the local paper, beginning with the obituaries, as if to confirm she has not yet appeared. A neighbor waves from across the street. The mail comes. The cat, which is not her cat, but has decided she belongs to it, visits for a saucer of milk and a nap in the sun patch on the rug. She watches the noon news at a volume slightly too high, then turns it down again, embarrassed by the loudness in an empty room. She starts a crossword, stops at 6-letter words for which she refuses to ask the internet for help. She means to cook something proper for dinner, but the appetite that used to bloom for 2 does not arrive for 1. She turns on the television for company and discovers that television makes terrible company. It never pauses to ask how you are. What she does not tell anyone is that the nights have grown longer and the bed feels colder, even in June. She falls asleep with the lamp on more often than not, because the house at 3 a.m. has its own language, a settling groan, a sigh in the vent, the wind slipping a finger under the screen. For a while, she told herself this was grief, and grief would pass like a season. But seasons are supposed to change by themselves, and this one didn't. At a medical checkup in early spring, a nurse took her blood pressure and frowned. The doctor listened to Anne describe the heaviness and the waking and the falling asleep too late. He asked about food, about walks, about company. When she shrugged, he leaned forward the way good doctors do when they are about to say a difficult truth gently. Anne, he said, loneliness isn't just a feeling. It affects sleep, the heart, even the immune system. We used to imagine it was only about mood. It's not. It's physical. Think of it the way we think of stress. Real, measurable, treatable. Treatable. The word surprised her. It made loneliness sound like something that could be held in the hand and turned toward light. The doctor suggested small steps, A phone call each day, a community activity, a short walk with a neighbor. Not because they are hobbies, he said, but because they are medicine. He smiled when he said it, as if granting permission for something she had forgotten she could do. On the bus home, Anne watched blocks of brick and maple float by like scenery in a play. She could see, very clearly, two versions of her life. The one where she arrived back to the quiet and allowed it to settle around her shoulders, and the one where she tried something small and unremarkable, like dialing a number. The choice looked small enough from the window seat. It did not feel small when she set her bag on the counter and stood in the kitchen, the phone on the table like a dare. She understood suddenly that bravery is not always a mountain. Sometimes it is 3 digits and a familiar name in your contacts. She called her friend Margaret first. "It's Anne," she said, and then, because she needed a reason to explain the reason, "I was thinking of you." There was a silence. Oh, those dangerous little pauses. And then Margaret's voice burst into the line like light through a door. "Anne, I was thinking of you too. I just didn't want to bother you." They laughed at that, the way older friends laugh when they realize they have been polite in the same way and to the same harm. 10 minutes became 20. They traded news. A knee that behaved in rain. A grandson who'd learned to bake. A television show neither trusted, but both watched anyway. When Anne hung up, the room felt different, as if someone had opened a window she hadn't noticed was closed. The next day, she called her older son. "How's the chaos?" she asked, which is how parents ask their grown children if they are sleeping and eating and doing the best they can. He was rushing between a meeting and a school pickup, but his voice softened when he heard hers. He promised a longer call on Sunday. On Wednesday, she phoned a woman from church she hadn't seen lately. On Thursday, encouraged by her own momentum, she dialed a number she didn't recognize. She meant to call the pharmacy and mistapped a digit. A man answered, startled. "I'm sorry," Anne said, blushing to an empty room. "I've got the wrong number." "Maybe," the man said, but he didn't hang up. "Or maybe it's the right number if you needed a human voice." He chuckled awkwardly, as if he had surprised himself by saying something kind. Anne laughed, and for a second the misdial felt like more than a mistake. They exchanged a few harmless sentences: weather, sports, the perpetual mystery of how to program a thermostat, and then they said goodbye, both sounding oddly cheered by the error. That was the first twist. Though Anne did not label it that way, she only knew that the world had offered a coincidence that felt like a wink. She did not call the stranger again. There are rules one keeps in the interest of good sense. But she kept the permission the moment had given her. A voice is a bridge, even when it travels to the wrong house. The second small step came the following week when Anne visited the library. She had seen a notice about story time for children and the need for volunteers willing to read aloud. It felt immodest to imagine she could be useful to anyone new, but she reminded herself of the doctor's sentence: not hobbies, medicine. So she walked into the children's room, where everything was primary colors and small chairs and books with animals intent on adventure. A librarian with cheerful earrings asked if Anne would like to begin with the picture book about a bear who lost his hat. Anne sat down, and 3 children moved instinctively closer, and her voice, steadier than she expected, found a rhythm. When she reached the page where the bear asks the rabbit a suspiciously specific question, a little girl in purple sneakers gasped and covered her mouth dramatically, and Anne felt something lift in her chest that had not lifted in months. When the hour ended, she walked home slowly, the air bright and newly important. Word travels in neighborhoods by ways older than the internet. A few days later, her next-door neighbor, Maria, widowed, cheerful, a decisive gardener, knocked to ask if Anne might want to walk in the evenings. "Only to the corner and back," Maria said, "so the doctor will stop frowning at me." They made a habit of it. Some nights they moved faster, some nights slower. Always they talked. They discovered they had lived parallel lives for years. The same grocery store, the same bank teller with the serious eyebrows, the same irritation with the bus that sometimes arrived early and sometimes not at all. They compared recipes and learned they had both lost the exact same cookbook, which means the recipe you love most. They waved to other walkers and, to their own delight, became the kind of women strangers wave back to. In June, Anne's younger son convinced her to try video calls. She learned to hold the phone at an angle that did not feature just her chin. She learned that toddlers do not care about your chin anyway. They care about the cat, which obligingly wandered into frame and became an instant celebrity. On her screen, the children showed her their drawings and their missing teeth, and the trick where the couch becomes a pirate ship. Anne felt the distance between Vancouver and her living room narrow to the width of a laugh. The house was still the same house. The light still moved across the floor in long fingers, but the quiet changed. It was not as heavy, not as loud. The television could be turned off without the room feeling abandoned. At night, the bed felt the correct temperature, which is to say, the temperature made by the knowledge that morning would bring someone to speak to. Midsummer brought the second twist. Anne had continued her library hours, had joined a small group that sorted donated paperbacks, had even begun to know the barista who remembered she liked more foam than coffee. One Tuesday after story time, a young mother lingered while her daughter stacked board books into a precarious tower. "You remind me of my grandmother," the woman said shyly. "She passed last year." "I didn't realize how much I missed being read to until I heard you." She hesitated. "Would you ever be willing to read to my mom?" "She's in assisted living nearby. She used to be a teacher, and she's forgetting things. She listens better than she reads now." The request startled Anne not because it was extraordinary, but because it was ordinary in a way that reached right into her empty evenings and gave them a new shape. She said yes. On Thursday, she walked into a room that smelled faintly of lemon and laundry and sat beside a woman with silver hair and bright, worried eyes. Anne read aloud from a novel the woman had taught to teenagers for 20 years. Sometimes the woman asked to go back a page. Sometimes she closed her eyes and finished a sentence before Anne could. On the second visit, the daughter brought a tin of lemon shortbread. On the third, the daughter did not stay. She trusted that the voices in the room would be enough. Anne went every week. She learned how to arrive without making a fuss and how to leave without making a hole. She learned that stories are boats and people step into them even when they cannot remember where home is. She learned that doing a small kindness is not the same as fixing a life, and that both truths are a kind of mercy. When she walked back to the bus stop, she felt taller, as if a small weight had moved from her shoulders to her pockets, where it could be carried more easily. Through all this, the doctor's sentence kept echoing. Not hobbies, medicine. She could feel the measurable things improving, the sleep, the appetite, the numbers on a chart. But there was also something less measurable, a returning curiosity, a glance toward tomorrow to see what or who might be there. She had not expected this. She had hoped only to make the quiet bearable. Instead, the quiet had become a room with a door that opened. A small group grew around Anne almost by accident. Maria with her purposeful stride, Margaret with her big laugh, two librarians who admired the way Anne could keep a child's attention without resorting to the use of animal sounds, though she was not above it. The barista, whose name was Danny, and who started a free coffee and conversation hour for seniors on Tuesday mornings. The daughter and the mother from assisted living, who introduced Anne to another daughter and another mother, because this is how circles widen. On a yellow September afternoon, Anne decided to do something that might have felt impossible in April. She invited 5 people, 2 new, 3 familiar, into her living room for tea. She spent the morning polishing the mug he had liked, not because anyone would drink from it, but because she wanted his unspoken blessing to sit on the shelf and watch the room fill. She set out a plate of butter cookies and a small jar of marmalade. She opened the window to let the last of summer in. And when the bell rang, and the voices rose, and the chairs scraped, and someone told a story about a toddler who believed the moon followed her home, Anne realized the house had learned to breathe again. She would have told you the evening felt perfect, except at the end when she returned the cups to the kitchen, she noticed her phone glowing on the table. She had missed a call, an unknown number, and a voicemail waited. For a moment, Anne felt a silly jolt of fear, old habits, but she pressed play. The message was plain and short, a woman's voice introducing herself as part of a call circle at the community center. Volunteers who phoned seniors living alone once a week to check in. "We heard you might be someone who could help us expand," the voice said. "Not because you need the calls, but because you might like to make them." There it was, loneliness turning into its opposite, not by drama, but by practice. Anne called back. The organizer explained that most volunteers were college kids or retirees with easy schedules, but very few knew how to keep a conversation warm for 10 minutes with a stranger about weather, groceries, and the proper way to fold fitted sheets. "I can do that," Anne said, and laughed at the smallness and the grandness of the offer. The first call she made as a volunteer was to a man named Russ, who had been a mechanic and still spoke as if every sentence were a bolt you tighten until it holds. He did not like small talk, but he liked describing the sound an engine makes when the spark plugs are failing, and Anne liked listening to people describe the thing they know. The second call was to a woman named Claire, who said she used to teach music, and then, without prompting, hummed a scale so pure that Anne had to sit down. The third call was, improbably, to the wrong number again. It belonged to the kind man from Spring who had said maybe it was the right number if she needed a voice. He remembered her. They marveled at the coincidence, promised to stop bumping into each other by phone, and wished each other well. Autumn drew a neat line across the maples. Anne began to carry a scarf on evening walks. At the library, she discovered that teenagers wandering the stacks sometimes needed the exact same attention as toddlers, and that reading aloud to a 16-year-old who pretends to be bored is a lesson in comedy. She learned to let silence sit for a second longer than was comfortable, because sometimes the sentence that follows is the one the person meant to say. And though she did not plan it this way, she found herself stepping into small moments where someone needed what she had in her pocket now: time, steadiness, a voice that does not rush. One night, when the house lay in that blue hour between supper and the late-night news, Anne reached to switch on the lamp and paused. She could sense the quiet returning, the way a person senses weather moving in from a distance. But the quiet was not a threat. It was a room waiting for a purpose. Her phone was on the table. The mug sat on the shelf, clean and available. The chair by the window, with its soft dip, faced the last of the light. She thought of her doctor, of the nurse's frown turned ordinary, of the librarian's earrings, of Maria's insistent knock, of the girl in purple sneakers, of the mothers who trusted her to read to their mothers, of the young barista who made the coffee foam thicker when she knew Anne was coming. She thought of the word treatable and wanted to add a word beside it: learnable. Connection is learnable. Some days it looks like bravery. Most days it looks like a phone call. Some days it looks like walking to the corner and back. Some days it looks like sitting in a small chair and pretending to be a bear who has misplaced his hat. It looks like polishing a mug for company, even if the company is only the story you are about to read. It looks like a wrong number that turns out to be a right lesson. It looks like an invitation to call strangers and then discovering they do not feel like strangers after 10 minutes. It looks like a life the house learns to hold again. Anne will tell you she is still herself, a woman who prefers paper books and real butter, who believes television is too loud and grandkids are miraculous, and the cat is only borrowing the rug. She will also tell you that the ache in her chest is different now. It is the good ache of a day used well, of a voice warmed by reading, of feet that remember the shape of the sidewalk. Her numbers on a chart are better, yes, but there is another number that matters more: the number of doors she passes where she knows a name. If you were to pass the house at evening now, you might still see the long fingers of light across the living room floor. You might still notice the empty chair by the window. You might think, there is a quiet place, and you would be right. But if you stood just a moment longer, you would hear what the quiet contains: a laugh on speakerphone, the chorus of a picture book, the creak of the door as a neighbor arrives in a scarf, the soft, ordinary music of a house that has learned again how to breathe. And if you, listening now, have a room that sounds like Anne's used to, if your evenings run long and the coffee grows cold and the news grows loud, there is a small door you can open that does not require courage so much as willingness. Make one call. Say one hello. Walk to the corner with one friend who needs the doctor to stop frowning. Read one page to someone who used to read entire chapters to other people's children. The medicine does not look like medicine until you take it. But once you do, the body remembers, and so does the heart. There is nothing miraculous in this story, and that is the miracle. A life turns not on grand gestures, but on hinges so small you do not see them until the door swings wide. A wrong number that becomes a blessing. A chair by a window that becomes a seat for a guest. A room that becomes a circle. A woman who becomes, again, the person she already was. Needed, useful, alive. And if you are wondering whether your house might breathe again, the answer is yes. It begins with a voice. Thank you for listening to Anne's story. If this touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Your words might be the encouragement someone else needs. And if you'd like more stories like this, about health, family, meaning, and second chances, stay with us here at Silver Simplified.